Beyond the forbidden.
The ancients believed, or they recorded, that there was a small group, upwards of around 200, of these watcher class beings. They called them angels, but maybe they had just extraordinary abilities that off-worlders might have. Tremendous lifespans, tremendous amounts of knowledge and ability. I don't know that they were supernatural, like they could telekinetically move anything, but sort of like if you were to go back to King Arthur's court, knowing what you know now, you'd be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Well, when you're 7 to 9 feet tall and you have 40,000 years of experience, multiple worlds of experience, you'd be considered that way too. What comes out in the book, in this series of books, is that the Nephilim are the ones that created all the religions on the earth. And the very first thing that they did is they taught that religion to hate all other religions. It was absolute genius, absolute genius. It got so bad in the early days that the earth was wiped out by water. It was sort of like a Control-Alt-Delete event for early earth. And then the Nephilim kind of figured out, okay, we're going to change our game plan. We're going to have to work a little bit more behind the scenes, not so much out in front leading the armies, but maybe behind the scenes leading the presidents and the kings and the queens. And so for the next 5,000 years, they ruled the earth. No question about it. But in 1776, a small group of men decided, look, we already have that future. That future's already been told to us, and we don't like it. We're going to pick another future. And so Earth started on another timeline. Okay? So 242 years ago, we started down a different timeline. And that force has been trying to get Earth back on that timeline ever since. And they almost made it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. Wanting to divide, that's why I wrote the book, The Grand Division. Because to divide the planet into factions or into light and darkness is exactly what the ancients spoke about. It's what they predicted. It's what they built all their structures, their mathematics, their architecture, their customs. Everything was built about this grand division, which makes you wonder, why in the world would someone do that 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago? What would they care about today? We don't care about people living 100 years from now, or even 10 years from now. Why did they care about now? And it's because in my heart of hearts, I honestly believe that they are us. We're the ones that built all that stuff. We're the ones that made those cities. We're the ones that left that math, that mysterious structure behind, so that when we got here, we would remember who we are and what we're supposed to be doing.
Become a member on Patreon to get full access to all exclusive content. A few of the perks is the full-length ad-free video version of the interviews, face-to-face interviews, bonus shows, and behind-the-scenes footage. You will also receive the video interview way in advance before the audio-only interview gets dropped on all platforms. Sign up and become a member today for only $3 a month. The link is in the description.
Oh, I'm ready. I'm doing fine. It's great. It's about 180 degrees here in Dallas, Texas. I'm in air-conditioned comfort, enjoying it.
The humidity is what kills me, because I work in a paper mill. I don't like it. Pays the bills. It pays the bills now. I wish I did something, because we need to get rid of that dinosaur type of technology. I think we already had the technology there. We just need to move forward. Anyways, it does pay the bills, and it's hot. It's freaking hot. But I know what you're talking about.
A lot of moist paper too.
Man, it's especially on top of those paper machines. It is no joke. But anyways, you have several books, the Birth trilogies, One Race for Time, the Physics, or the Grand Division, and also The Gathering. And I'm gonna give links in the description below for everybody listening and watching this. And also, you have a new book. Where I'm actually going to save this one for maybe another month or two down the road. Charm of Favor, a true story of the rise of the Clinton crime syndicate. Man, I'm telling you, these books sound very amazing. But what I'm going to try to pick your brain with, Brooks, is first off, I want to start off with a hollow earth. Now, I know you've been talking about that for a while now, but your research into the hollow earth, the inner earth, is probably far superior than any researcher out there, hands down. Seriously, you do a great job with that. But what's new with your research into the hollow earth these days, Brooks?
Well, there's not a whole lot new. What we have done over the last 10 years that we've been working on this subject, at first we developed the hypothesis that we had to prove that Earth maybe isn't formed like we have always classically thought. Maybe we don't live on a molten ball floating through space. That maybe the structure of Earth is, as far as the planetary core geology, is different than what we have always taught in our schools. And you could get a textbook on it and look it up. It's pretty academic. We really have always thought that the Earth is molten in the middle, and that the mantle or the crust that we live on is kind of a thin, undulating membrane with life on it, with an atmosphere on the outside. But as we began getting more and more instruments online, seismographs, satellite views in various wavelengths of light and radio waves and magnetic waves that we've been able to measure, what it's done, it's called into question our classic way of looking at the Earth, and whether it's JPL or NASA or even the USGS, and some of the analysis that's been done of their own measurements. We have discovered things that we really didn't expect to find. So the trying to prove that the Earth is not hollow started out as something we thought we'd be able to do in a year or two. But here we're 10 years into it, and we still cannot disprove that the Earth may be hollow. We don't have enough evidence to prove that. So we call that in science a null hypothesis. If we can't prove that it's false, then it must be true. I'm not saying that it is true. I'm not saying that Earth is hollow. We've only drilled into it maybe 8 miles, so we don't really know physically if we can get through the crust. The crust, by seismography and through what's called Earth tomography, where we use these long wave, high amplitude radio waves, which are generated by HAARP and other satellite technologies. They try to, like do an MRI of the Earth, or we do a CAT scan of the Earth with the vibrations from earthquakes. We're getting a clearer and clearer picture of it every year, but the truth is we still don't know. What we suspect is that there may be openings in the crust from the atmosphere we live in to an inner space inside the Earth. This may be an oceanic vent, it may be an atmospheric vent, we just don't know for sure. That's why we mounted the expedition in the first place.
Whatever happened with that expedition? The one where you sent, I guess, elaborate a little bit, case if the few that haven't heard your interviews or your radio show talking about the project with the balloon sent over the Arctic, because there might be a few out there that may not be familiar with Dr. Brooks Agnew. Maybe.
Well, we haven't done that yet. We talked to the company that makes the balloons, that has the cameras and the kits and everything. They sell them to high schools and colleges. You see them all the time. The issue is not sending it up and then retrieving it. It's that we can't figure out how to get it to traverse the ice. Usually when they go up to around 100,000 feet or something like that, about 20 miles, and then the helium skin becomes brittle and it becomes about as large as it can stretch, and it bursts. and then it parachutes back down to Earth, and you recover the cooler that has your camera and its battery, and then you download the information and take a look at what you saw or what it picked up. The issue is that from the time it goes up to the time it comes down is maybe 8 or 10 miles. We need it to traverse something like 400 miles. So that's a different kind of technology, and we just haven't come up with that yet. First of all, we can get it up to altitude, and maybe we can get it to traverse the ice, but then how to get it to come down where you can
Mhm.
receive. If it comes down on the ice, it's lost. If it comes down at sea, it's lost. So it becomes prohibitively expensive to do trial and error. So we're trying to reduce that, and we haven't figured out a way to do that yet.
They are making drones. I don't mean to interject, Brooks. They are making drones a lot more cheaper nowadays, but maybe somewhere in the near future, we can have something like that.
They don't have the range though. Drone can go maybe 6 miles on a really good signal. An autonomous drone can go up and maybe go 20 miles, but that's all the battery that they have. You'd actually have to have, a lighter than air drone that used almost no energy and then would pierce its own balloon at a certain GPS location and then come down. You can see we've thought about this a lot. We've thought about all kinds of iterations and ways to do it. We just haven't implemented it yet. Actually, the most feasible way we thought was to rent one of the icebreakers and then maybe go over 10,000 miles of ocean in about 10,000 square miles of ocean in about 15 days. But it was a $3 million venture, and we just were unable to raise the money,
Mm.
which is interesting because after 10 years of working on this, more people know about the Hollow Earth than knew about Middle Earth when the movies came out.
Do you before we get into that, do you ever um get tired of, I guess because of interviews and things about the Hollow Earth? Does it ever get old? Does it ever get stagnated to you, or does it still spark your interest? And does it still give you that fire, that ambition to know what the hell is really going on? Like what there has to be something here because modern day quackademia just doesn't have it right.
Well, that's a great thing about science. And really, there are sciences that take more than one lifetime to enjoy, like astronomy. I could
Yeah.
never be an astronomer because, I mean, how far how far are we going to move through the procession to get a different view of the stars than what we have right now? You
Hmm.
could look at stars for 70 years and maybe see, 1 degree movement in space. I couldn't do it. Geology is about the same way. But the thing that drives a scientist is questions. When we ask questions and we don't have answers, then we try to devise experiments to get those answers. And if you can do it in a lifetime, that's a great achievement. It's a great achievement. So no, I don't get tired of it. And there's a peculiar thing about this particular field of study, and that is the passion that people have about it. Every time I go lecture somewhere about the Hollow Earth expedition, and it's quite a lengthy lecture now. It's like 3 hours long by the time we get through all the film and the pictures and the interviews and samples that we've taken, uh, actual data that's actually been recovered from several JPL missions that have been launched relative to Hollow Earth investigation. We get through the Stanford data, the MIT data, the Cambridge data. It's quite lengthy. What I find is people don't lose interest. They really seem to be attached to this Hollow Earth thing. They have an emotion about it, a passion about it that just doesn't go away. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. So no, it doesn't get old. For a while when I was in my early 50s, it impacted my professional career because, as you said, you can go to Google and well, you can spend a few weeks looking at things. And when you're trying to be a professional scientist, you're trying to be a statistician in industry, which I am, and they, in as part of the background check, do a Google search on you, and they see references to the Hollow Earth. It can impact your livelihood. So for about 6 or 7 or 8 years, I was ready to give up because it was financially impacting me. But now I don't care. I've passed all that time period. I've got 10 books in print. I've been on every TV program there
Yes, you
is,
have.
almost every radio program there is, many times, and I seem to have weathered it all. So
I'm
now,
glad you brought that up, Brooks, because why is modern academia keeping the Hollow Earth hypothesis in the dark and not taking it serious? Are they being controlled by an unseen hand behind the scenes?
well, when you're talking about academia, you're really talking about money and you're talking about publishing, and there are headwaters for money in academia, and mostly the headwaters are like the CIA or DARPA or the Department of Energy. Occasionally, maybe the Department of Interior, it depends on what you're doing. But everything, all the polar research, all the space research, half the movies that we watch in the theaters are all financed by these government agencies. They're not financed by private investors. And these schools are making billions of dollars off of these endowments that come in. I mean, the CIA people would be amazed. Billions and billions of dollars every year poured into schools to do research on things that actually would be quite surprising if you thought, what the heck's the CIA doing research in that? And also DARPA. DARPA is a huge source of money for these universities. All the viral cures and cancer cures and all that's funded by DARPA, all of that stuff. So when it comes to building satellites, you're building something that's never been built before. There's no like satellite factory. There are satellite labs where people know how to build, power supplies and uh, retro rockets that are powered by hydrazine and a little catalytic converter. They know how to build those components, but putting all that together into a satellite that can withstand 9 Gs of takeoff, launching out into orbit, controlling from Earth, it takes sometimes a year to get them in the right orbit to be able to do their experiment. The experiment takes a few hours, and then the satellite's done. We try to put probes on other planets. It can take 5 years to get a launch engine, so it's very expensive, and all that money comes from government. It doesn't come from private investors. So academia is doing a lot of research in this area of Hollow Earth. Stanford has Elizabeth Williams, if she's still there. She's head of planetary plate tectonics. This is an area that isn't high on the resume.
Are they getting any grants and funding for these, or are they being suppressed?
That's the only way they survive is the grants. There's no way any of this could be studied without grants. So these people, my brother was chairman of physiology at Johns Hopkins for 10 years, and he spent probably 5 days out of 7 writing grant applications. That's the only way they survive.
Brooks, if you were to present, I guess, your case in front of Congress on the Hollow Earth, what would be a synopsis of your own scientific research to prove against the modern academia frame of thinking in that the Earth has a solid core?
Well, for one thing, I think they'd be pretty surprised because every time someone sees me, I'm talking to them about something else, which is just about as controversial, it seems. Um, I don't know. They do have what's called the National Science Foundation. It does put out some small grants, 50,000, 100,000 here and there, but mostly it's affiliated. There's very, very, very little going out to for-profit or what we call private industry as far as grants from government, unless you're willing to write a certain amount of that grant back to some foundation so they can launder it to a campaign somewhere. Then I just don't participate in that, so I've never gotten a grant.
Hmm. What is I guess, the furthest that we have drilled into the Earth so far? And 8 miles. Well, why do they say that it's hard for us to go any further because of heat? Because I hear a lot about that, Brooks. Because I'm with you, Brooks. I'm with you. I believe that the Hollow Earth exists. But where is the heat coming from? Because magma, or is it the the second sun that's in the inner Earth, or where's this heat that they're talking about?
And close to it at 8 miles. The way to think about it is like a baseball inside of a basketball. Okay, except that the skin of the basketball is about 3 inches thick. So that's the way to think about the Earth. The crust of the Earth, we believe, is somewhere between 850 and 900 miles thick. That's a long
Mm,
way. That's like the distance from LA to St. Louis.
mm.
So it's a long, long way. Um, Inside that crust is a tremendous amount of mass, iron and nickel and all of the mass and silica, all the mass of the Earth is basically in the crust. So it's the center of gravity for our planet, really. And it's not totally motionless either. It's moving all the time because it's being squeezed and stretched by tidal gravity from our own moon, from our sun, and from gravitational waves that come through our neighborhood. So that movement, that constant movement, and the fact that it's maybe 4 billion years in the process of expanding and cooling, the center of that is full of magma pockets, which we consider to be like volcanic activity. So the main issue about drilling is that you don't put pressure on the drill after a while. What you're doing is you're holding the drill up. It's a mechanism on the drill rig we call a Kelly. A Kelly is just a gigantic rotating brake. And what it really does, it holds on to this 8 mile long piece of steel, which has to support its own weight, which if it gets long enough, it's going to be so heavy, it's just going to pull the steel in two
Hmm.
because it just takes that much strength. So the drill steel itself has to be very big at the top and very narrow at the bottom near the drill. And all we're really doing is turning that, and we're holding it up, and we're only letting it advance maybe 5 or 6 feet an hour. Because if we let it advance anymore, the torque would just twist the steel in two. It's like trying to drill a hole through a 2x4 using a drinking straw. You could do it, but you can't put very much pressure against the drinking straw because it's just going to fold up. It takes time. So that's what the big challenge for drilling. Now, we try to pour lubricants down in the hole, which, if you've done any oil drilling, which I've done a lot of it in the field, the issue is high pressure gas. You get into these gas pockets that are 2,500, 3,500 psi.
It's probably dangerous too.
Sure, some of it's poisonous. You don't want a fire on the rig, that's what happened with the Deepwater Horizon.
Yeah,
The
good
blowout
movie.
didn't prevent the methane gas from blowing up through the mud. That's how we keep it all compressed, is we use mud as the lubricant. And we force mud down through the center of the bit, and then it comes up the outside of the bit through the hole and carries up the cuttings. And that's how we analyze the strata as we're drilling through it. We have what's called a mud room. And the mud room takes samples every so many feet, every so many hours, and that way they know what the structure is that we're going through. And the mud, we can change the weight of it depending on the gas pressure that we're going through at the time. So the deepest holes in the world are in Russia, and they're down about 8 miles, which is nothing compared to the thickness of the crust. The only real way we've been able to see, sort of, into the crust is with vibrations. Vibrations from earthquakes and long wave, high amplitude, like billions of watts, radio waves that we beam into the planet, and then they bounce off all the strata, and we receive them back with antennas. We spectrographically divide that up, and we can get a picture of what the inside of the crust.
I don't mean to interject, Brooks, but how in the hell did they get the conclusion that we have what the inner Earth looks like with the solid core and the crust layer and everything else? Where do they get this conclusion? Because if there's really not a whole lot of, I guess you could say, available technology to see what exactly is beneath our feet, then where do they get this conclusion? Out of their rear ends?
Probably the best question of the night right there. Because one of the things that happens in our science is a lot of times there's sort of a religiosity to it.
Without a doubt.
For instance, let's just digress just for a moment and talk about um, the theory of evolution. Okay, there's no theory of evolution because in order to have a theory, you first have to have a hypothesis and then develop experiments, and then from experiments you gather data and facts, and from the facts, if they cannot be refuted, then you develop a theory. There are no facts in evolution. There's no ever any example, not even on a bacterial level, not fruit flies, not dogs, nothing that jumps from species to species. There's no in between DNA, period, on our planet. Zero facts to support evolution. Now, that doesn't mean that genes cannot make environmental or choices based on environmental stress, like toxins or temperature or food supply or uh, reproducibility or oxygen levels. The DNA, the actual genes, can make a choice of proteins inside that range. And we're surprised at how large that range is. You know, short beaks, long beaks, dark skin, light skin, short feathers, long feathers. I mean, all kinds of choices that give a species a survivability advantage. But outside of that, there's no change ever. These proteins are engineered to, and I use that term very literally, they're engineered to act within a certain range of the environment. And if they can't, it goes extinct. That's just the way it is. So now let's talk about geology or planetary core geology. In the early days, there were just ideas about the way we looked at other stages of planets in the universe. If we look at big gas accretion disks in space, we can sort of get a snapshot of what a future or what a primitive solar system would look like. We see some matter gathering in the center of it, and by doing so, it's gathering a lot of heat and a lot of mass, and eventually it may ignite and become a sun. And then surrounding it at various Fibonacci nodes, we have planets that gather, and they also gather mass. And of course, as they assume a smaller space, they spin faster and faster. Conservation of momentum. We see that snapshots of it all over space. We don't really have but about 150 years of really good data looking at this kind of stuff in space. So it's just a very small snapshot. But what we think happens is that these planets go through one of three phases. Either they collapse in on themselves and spin so fast and they develop so much energy inside themselves that they explode. And then the second phase, they become lopsided and will spin off a piece of themselves, which will become a moon. We can see that in our own solar system with Venus and Mercury. And then the third, let's call it a proto-phase, is that the planet will be fairly well balanced, but it will expand and cool and expand and cool and expand and cool. We'll call this, let's just call it the Goldilocks zone. And when this happens, the crust will eventually stay cool. It won't be molten anymore because, like the ice skater that's pulled her arms in and she's spinning really fast, and then she lets her arms out, she slows way down for the camera, and then she can do whatever leap she's going to do. That's the same thing that happens with planets. As the crust expands, that crust slows down because there's only so much energy in the set. So as the diameter gets larger, the spin gets slower. But what happens to the core on the inside? It's still spinning at the original speed. So as the crust becomes separated from this heavy, dense crystalline metal core on the inside, a gap forms with the crust spinning very quickly and the crust, or the core spinning quickly and the crust spinning slowly. Now you have a counter rotation, which forms this very powerful magnetic field. Some planets have it and some planets don't. Now we know that the planets that don't have it have one of two conditions. either they don't have a core, which means the core came apart and expanded with the crust, or the crust and the core are rotating at the same speed. There's no counter rotation. The core has slowed down to tidally lock with the crust, and so there's no magnetosphere. But we also know that without a magnetosphere, it's almost impossible to have surface life on that planet.
What exactly? Where's your stance with? Because I've heard you say that you don't believe we have a core, like just a solid core, but possibly maybe a second sun. Maybe is that where we get that?
When we talk about suns, we're thinking stars, like the thermonuclear explosion that's going on right above Texas as we speak. I know, because if I go outside, I can feel it on my skin.
Oh yeah.
But it's not like that. It's not a fusion reaction going on inside the Earth. What we do know, and I say we have factual evidence to back this up, and it has been repeated, so it's pretty solid evidence. We've spectrographically determined that the core is made almost 100% of iron. We know this because iron has a certain number of protons and neutrons. That nucleus is a certain size, and that the electron clouds above that nucleus are at an exact orbit level or probability level. And we know that electrons that go back and forth between those shells put off a certain photon. That photon has been detected, so we know that it's iron in the center of the Earth. The only question was, what's the temperature of that iron? The first experiment that was done said that it was at 5,000 degrees C. Well, chemically, there's a problem with that, because the physical characteristics of a crystalline structure of iron won't stay stable at that temperature. It needed to be higher. So what they had to do in the lab was duplicate the pressure. So they created what's called a diamond anvil. And they basically put the iron crystal in the anvil and pressed it, and then heated it with a laser. Once they got it to 6,000 degrees C, the crystal formed just like a diamond, only made out of iron, and the frequency matched perfectly.
Wow.
Now, that makes sense. But now the thing about 6,000 degrees C is that's also the surface of the sun, same temperature. So the light that's being put off by the iron from these photons going back and forth at that kind of temperature is white, and it can be used for photosynthesis. It doesn't need to be made by two hydrogen protons coming together to make helium and the subsequent broad range of photons that you get from that fusion reaction. It can come from other sources.
So with this light, let's say that it's down there, and let's say that, of course, I believe that they are beings. I believe that the aliens aren't necessarily out there, but they're here with us beneath our feet. So explain exactly how is this sun or this light source, the core, is it just floating within the earth somehow? And then there's just different caverns and different subterranean, I guess you could say, civilizations that have different types of ETs. Give me, I know I may be asking you to speculate a little bit, but what I love about you, Brooks, is that you're a scientist that looks outside the box, and you have a very open mind, and you don't limit yourself to just the modern day frame of thinking. That's what I love about you. But give me what your gut tells you what's down there, Brooks.
I left my box in Los Angeles a long time ago. I mean, you're accessing the little boy in me, so just let me stick to this a little bit, and then I'll speculate. The fact that the core is there, what we really needed was supporting information that told us that there's some morphology that's livable on the inside of the crust. And one of the delineations that astrobiologists or paleobiologists use is liquid water. And we do have moons in our solar system that have liquid methane, and we kind of have to think about a different life form when we're thinking about methane because the whole redox system is different than it is with water. Water is a very unique uh, compound in the universe. It reacts differently to temperature than any other bond out there. This oxygen hydrogen bond, because oxygen, as you know, has these 4 electrons, right? Well, 2 of them are taken up with the H2O, right? Well, this extra pair kind of forces the hydrogens to come around the oxygen atom to at an angle, and that angle liquid is different than the angle frozen. When it's frozen, the electrons kind of fall a little closer,
Collapse a little bit.
and the hydrogens can push away from each other because they're positive and they want to repel. So that angle gets out to about 110 degrees, and when it does, ice actually expands instead of contracts like every other freaking thing in the universe. So water is very different. Water also has informational properties that we're just now beginning to understand. So one of the things we needed to do was determine, is there liquid water inside the planet? Well, Dr. Y. Sessions with Washington University took his grad students, which don't work for very much, and said, okay, we've got 600,000 seismograms here. These are printouts that are generated by seismometers, which are placed all over the planet. And every time there's an earthquake on the planet, a real heavy one, like 6 or 6.5 or 7.5, it really thumps the planet hard. All the other seismometers around the planet pick that quake up further and further and further away. And it picks up a series of waves. We call them pressure waves or shear waves or even shadow waves. And to that date, no one had really compiled the data. We just kind of look at it as an individual print. So they developed a program and they crunched this data and they were looking for patterns. And what they discovered was underneath our Atlantic Ocean, which is very deep, underneath that is the crust. And underneath the crust, inside the planet, was another ocean, bigger than the Atlantic Ocean. And what they were actually picking up were the waves crashing on the shore inside the planet. We call these damping waves. So that was pretty remarkable. That paper was landmark, absolutely excited, everybody in the world. And JPL and NASA and even other countries got, a fair amount of grant money together and ran experiments and tried to corroborate that, and they did. So now we have a space and we have liquid water. And I will tell you, as a scientist, absolutely positively, without any doubt in my mind, there's life there. But is it microbial? Is it more complex like fish, or is it intelligent? That remains to be the question. There is some data to back up it might be more complex, because in 2007, when we were really going to mount this expedition, the reason we were going to do it is because there was an anomalous calving event, like when a cow has a calf. This is what we talk about when we talk about Arctic sheets of ice floating on the water. Sometimes the temperature will just get right, and the wave motion will get just right, and the wind will get just right, and it will tear off a big piece of ice. Well, a state-sized piece of ice calved off the Arctic in 2007, and it opened up the Northwest Passage for the first time in, I don't know, not in our recorded history, maybe 20,000 years, who knows. So every couple of years, there's an oceanographic expedition to Malaysia. And the reason they go to Malaysia is they sample rays, like stingrays and manta rays. Mm-hmm. The reason that they do this is because this particular life form for the sea is sort of like sampling frogs in a jungle. Frogs respond very quickly to environmental stress. They do this by mutating. So they go to Malaysia to sample the rays every couple of years to see what the stress of what we do in the ocean affects life in the ocean. And every couple of years, they'll find maybe 15 or 20 new, what they call species or subspecies of rays. But in 2007, when they went to Malaysia, they found 1,500 new species of rays. And it wasn't just rays. They found dorsal finned squids. They found frilled sharks, which had been extinct for at least 1 million years, maybe 2 million years. Live coelacanths. These are things we have fossils for, but we've never seen live ones. Not fully mature adults swimming around like they grew up there, which they didn't. Which led us to believe maybe when that ice calved off and opened up that passage, that it opened a vent between the oceans and life began to merge.
Makes sense.
And that was our theory. So we thought if we could get toward that opening, wherever it is, because no one's ever located it actually, we thought we could locate it because we had the right equipment and the right scientists and the right ship to do it. We thought if we could get close enough to it, we could sample that water very close to the vent. The plankton would be different. The crystallinity would be different. That's the way water freezes. Different bodies of water have different crystallinity because of the minerals, because of what we call the magnetic memory of the water. Remember, I told you water has a way of picking up information. The relationship between hydrogen and oxygen, and that bond, that energy, is unique. And I'll explain that a little bit from an atomic point of view in a minute. But we thought if we could get close enough, we would see a marked difference. It wouldn't be diluted in, all over the ocean and very difficult to find. And I think it's still a meaningful experiment, but it's extremely expensive and it is extremely dangerous. So they've built a new ship, which we think is particularly outfitted for it, called the Arctica. It just was launched last year. So it's still $3 million. It still takes a year to plan, and we have to ship all the instruments to Russia, and everything has to be approved through customs. And then it goes from St. Petersburg up to Murmansk, which is another couple of months. It takes a lot of planning. This is not your normal event planning event. This is a multi-year expedition, which I call the greatest expedition mankind has ever done. We've never sent men to Mars, not yet. And it would be just about as hard to go to this area.
Wow. So now we're about to get, of course, now this is the disclaimer, folks, to everybody that's listening. We're about to put our tinfoil hat on a little bit. Now, this doesn't mean that we necessarily believe 100% truth of what we're about to say or whatever. We're just having an open conversation and having fun, right, Brooks? Just having intelligent,
I don't believe very often. I'm a data person, but I'll go with it. Keep going.
But do you think that the Nephilim and or fallen angels are still here on Earth with us? Possibly they live inner Earth. And if so, what is the story, according to your research, and of how they ended up here and remained with us here on Earth?
Well, that's a lot of territory. The ancients believed, or they recorded, that there was a small group, upwards of around 200, of these watcher class beings. They called them angels, but maybe they had just extraordinary abilities that off-worlders might have. Tremendous lifespans, tremendous amounts of knowledge and ability. I don't know that they were supernatural, like they could telekinetically move anything, but sort of like if you were to go back to King Arthur's court, knowing what you know now, you'd be pretty powerful.
Yeah.
Well, when you're 7 to 9 feet tall and you have 40,000 years of experience, multiple worlds of experience, you'd be considered that way too. So the evidence from these ancient civilizations is that they did come and they did teach, not the common people, but the leadership. In fact, they may have developed the leadership. There was an interesting movie out. It didn't really go well in the theaters, but it was called John Carter.
Yeah.
It was written by the same guy that wrote Tarzan. Just to kind of put it in perspective, it was a turn
Didn't
of
Denzel Washington playing that?
no,
I guess I'm thinking of something else then.
yeah. John Carter was, actually didn't have a lot of star power in it, but it had one aspect to it, that there were these travelers, and what they would do is they would come in with their superior technology, and they sort of thrived on the conflict that they could generate in the civilization itself. It was very Nephilim-like, although they didn't actually call them Nephilim or call them angels. They were a being that took advantage of lesser civilizations, which they were doing on Mars, which they called Barsoom in the book. Um, so the idea that Nephilim could come here and were tasked originally with by the Creator, to watch over us, to make sure that maybe we didn't inadvertently kill ourselves off. But as the story goes, somewhere in early part of Genesis, they became enamored with Earth women, which is pretty easy to do. I'm pretty enamored with Earth women too. But as the story goes, they actually had intercourse with them and offspring with them, and their offspring were extraordinary giants, and they didn't have a long lifespan, but they were quite vicious and quite lustful and hungry while they were here. Fortunately, most of them were hybrids, but some of them weren't, and we still have their giantess genes in our gene pool somewhere. And there's a worldwide project to try to isolate those genes, try to identify those genes right now. It's a program which DARPA launched, but because they wanted to do it by force, it wasn't very popular. And what happened is they said, well, let's sell it. We'll just sell it to people. We'll market it to people, and people will do it voluntarily. And so that's what they're doing. That's what the 23andMe program is. Believe me, they're gathering. They'll give you a report on where your roots came from, but they're getting a lot more.
It's research.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My brother was on the team that launched the Human Genome Program at Johns Hopkins, and it's gone way beyond where they thought it would go.
Yeah, my wife wants to. She's in the other bedroom right now, but she wants to do that. She wants to see where our roots are from. But my tinfoil hats. I'm always questioning everything. I question everything.
I search for Captain America myself, but this.
I'm afraid that 10 years down the road, I'm gonna walk on the sidewalk or somewhere. I'm gonna be in a store. I'm gonna see somebody that looks just like me, or whatever. 20, 30 years from now, it's like there's no telling what they're doing with your blood or with your DNA. Because I guess when you hand it off, it's theirs.
Yes, and if think about it, if you look at what DARPA really does with what they learn, it's all warfighting based. Everything, all the gene therapy, all the viral transmitting of drug therapy, that is really truly breakthrough stuff. But believe me, I've done the research. I go look up their project and look up their article and go to their website and go to their foundation and then go to the donors of the foundation and then go to the donors of that donor, and eventually I get to DARPA. And when I pulled DARPA's budget and saw the things that they were pouring billions and billions of dollars into, it's very eye-opening. If you wanted to develop a weapon that would only destroy a very narrow gene pool, you have the information now to do it.
All roads lead to DARPA, right? It's really scary. I know
why they do it. I know why they do it, because they've told me. They do it because if they don't, someone else will. And they do it because they want a way to defend against it, or they want to be able to use it first. So I understand the logic, but I don't condone it.
So this is a two-part question. Yes or no? Do you think that the fallen angels or Nephilim are here?
I do think that they are here. I do think that they are working behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is
you think they're working alongside the elites of the world, and that force is the hidden hand behind all the false flags, geoengineering, and the evil that we have here present on Earth, possibly.
I don't know about all of it, but some of the stuff goes into automatic after a while. But I maintain in the Birth trilogy. The Birth trilogy is a true story of Earth, but it is every event that happens in it is actually backed by scientific information. But the story itself is sort of an alternative form of the rapture. It is the rapture, but it isn't anything like what you expect. What comes out in the book, in this series of books, is that the Nephilim are the ones that created all the religions on the earth. And the very first thing that they did is they taught that religion to hate all other religions. It was absolute genius, absolute genius. It got so bad in the early days that the earth was wiped out by water. It was sort of like a Control-Alt-Delete event for early Earth. And then the Nephilim kind of figured out, okay, we got to change our game plan. We're going to have to work a little bit more behind the scenes, not so much out in front leading the armies, but maybe behind the scenes leading the presidents and the kings and the queens. And so for the next 5,000 years, they ruled the earth. No question about it. But in 1776, a small group of men decided, look, we already have that future. That future has already been told to us, and we don't like it. We're going to pick another future. And so Earth started on another timeline. Okay? So 242 years ago, we started down a different timeline. And that force has been trying to get Earth back on that timeline ever since. And they almost made it a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. And we've just narrowly escaped it. So that's what I think. I have enough data to back it up. I promise you, if you read the Birth trilogy, and especially if you read Charm of Favor, you're going to know what I know. And I promise you, you won't doubt it much.
And I will give the links in the description to those books. Would you rather me give those links to Amazon or to your website?
Oh, either way, it goes to Amazon, because I used to stock them in my garage, but I got tired of having 10,000 copies of books in my garage and sitting up all weekend signing books and mailing them. So I just let Amazon do it now. They handle all the publishing and all that for me, and they do a great, wonderful job. You can't get them autographed, but here's what you do get. Inside the book is an email address that you can write to. It's me. If you write me, I will send you the audio version of those books for free. So that's what you get for buying the book at Amazon. You can't get my autograph, but you will get the audio book for nothing. So if you're a good reader, don't worry about it, because I read it for you.
Is it your voice or a sexy female voice?
Afford anybody sexy.
No, you have a great voice, especially a great radio voice, Brooks. But can you stick around for about 15 more minutes? So, and I will give the links, like I said, to your books. And while people is watching this, do your searches on Amazon and his website, X Square Radio. So if the fallen angels and Nephilim are here, I guess where do ETs fit into the picture? Are they working alongside each other, possibly? Because my thing is, Brooks, like I stated earlier, I'm starting to lean more towards the fact that I think they're already here. I don't necessarily think that they're coming here in nuts and bolts spacecraft, or I think they're either already here beneath our feet, living within the inner Earth, or the other possibility is that they're interdimensionally traveling here interdimensionally. That's the reason why they slip in and out. Okay, it's either that or the inner Earth, and it makes sense because the gray ETs, what do they have? They have dark eyes, and you would say, I guess, things when they evolve in, I guess, a dark environment. And scientists already saying that in the distant future, the Earth will start fading, will start dying. And so some people would say that the gray ETs are from the future, sent here to I don't know, whatever. But what is your thoughts on the, I guess, the ETs, the aliens that are, I guess, in this field of research that everybody talks about and researches, and even abductions. Do you think that they're already here, Brooks?
Well, you're getting into an area that's not my area of expertise. I'll put it that way. And I've never personally met one,
I
but
haven't either.
I've had long conversations with guys like Stephen Bassett and others who have really paid their dues in this industry. They don't really have the big headlines, they don't have the big documentaries, but they've paid their dues. I've had long conversations with him and Andy Basiago and others, many, many days face to face discussing these things. Logically, it makes sense. As big as the universe is, the way the numbers are, there's probably intelligent life on other worlds. In my book, Remembering the Future, the Physics of the Soul and Time Travel, I say just about that, matter of factly. But like you said, nuts and bolts, not the way to travel from one M-class planet to another, because we already know they're a long, long, long ways away, many, many lifetimes away from us, unless they can travel interdimensionally, which I kind of thought for a long time was the stuff of, Isaac Asimov or Gene Roddenberry. But that being said, I took a year and I went to the two, this is going to be a long name, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatories. They're LIGO for short. There are two of them in this country. One's in Hanford, Washington. The other one's in Livingston, Louisiana, not far from you. You should go see it. It's a public facility. These are very, very sensitive interferometers. That is to say, they're like giant laser framing squares. Okay. The way they work, the theory that Kip Thorne and Stephen Hawking came up with, and although I communicated back and forth with them through the years, I wasn't involved in the developing of the interferometer. But the way they work is they have a source laser that shoots at a mirror that's half coated, and it splits the laser beam, and the laser beam goes down two tunnels that are 4 kilometers long and strike a sapphire coated mirror that's very, very flat. They bounce this laser back and forth until it's very, very long, bring it back to the origin, and then out of phase, those two laser beams cancel each other out and make a black spot. Okay? Their theory was that when gravitational waves come through the universe, that they ripple space-time. And in rippling space-time, it means that the pathway the laser's traveling changes in length. And when it does, they should get a signal, because the two legs will probably not change length at exactly the same way. With one in Hanford, Washington, and one in Livingston, Wyoming, they're far enough apart on the curvature of the Earth that they can triangulate between these two and find the source of that gravitational wave. Well, it was not very many years ago, very recent, like 3 or 4 years ago, they finally got the technology to synchronize the two laboratories and to control the wavelength of light and the laser so it didn't drift too much. And now they've got this thing down where it will actually detect a Planck length, 10 to the minus 33rd centimeters. That's the smallest resolution we can get in the universe. And what they have finally done, and I believe the team will win the Nobel Prize for this, what they have finally done is they have directly measured a black hole. They've already measured coalescing neutron stars, but we can do that with radio telescopes. They directly measured a black hole with the LIGO system. Now, when I went there, I'm standing there with Dr. Fred Raab, spelled R-A-A-B, he pronounces his last name Raab, who's the CEO or the manager of the Hanford facility up in Washington. And this is after his demonstration. We're just talking about physics. And he said, well, one of the remarkable things that we're seeing is we're actually seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension. I went, wait, repeat that again to me. He said, we are seeing particles pop into our dimension from another dimension. And the same in reverse, going back out to other dimensions. Well, that's information. We know that photons or particles popping in and out of dimensions, this is an exchange of information between dimensions. And if it's possible for a physical particle, it's possible for a physical being. And that opened the window for my mind to start thinking about this interdimensional travel. So this could be the way that high technology can move about the universe.
That's incredible. And maybe well, man, I can go down so many avenues. So within the next maybe 10 minutes, I'm going to have to definitely I'm telling you, it's like which road. I'm at a fork, well, many forks. Which road do I want to go down with you? Because you're you know a little about a lot of things, but of course you specialize in certain things in scientific research. But so what in the hell is going on with Antarctica, Brooks? And because there's been a lot of interest, big interest down there, and with the and also with the Antarctic Treaty of 1961, I believe, limits, military. Everybody just look up Antarctic Treaty 1961. So what is going on down there, Brooks? And could there actually be an entrance down there to the inner Earth also?
Well, the unique thing about Antarctica compared to the Arctic, which has kind of been my area of interest for 10 years, is Antarctica is actually a continent. It's actually land with ice on it. Now, there is ice on the water, of course, and Antarctica has grown enormously in the last couple of centuries. It's really, really expanded in size. Um, but that being said, you are correct. There is a lot of official interest in Antarctica. To get to Antarctica, you have to be affiliated. That means you have to be part of a university or part of the military. So it is really interesting to see people like, representatives, high representatives of the Vatican, or Secretary of State John Kerry, or other
Buzz
individuals.
Aldrin.
Yeah, Buzz Aldrin, who had health problems while he was down there. This is not an easy
Uh-huh.
trip. It's a short window, 6 or 8 weeks, when you can get in and get out pretty well. Outside of that, it's treacherous to get in and out of there. You don't go down there by ship, that's for sure. There was a venture that got stuck down there about 3 years ago. The ice formed so fast they couldn't get their ship out. And this is one of my ancestors got caught the same way looking for the North Magnetic Pole, and it crushed his ship, smashed it into toothpicks. So they got out of the ship and got all the supplies onto the ice, and they just let the ice just crush the boat. Well, they survived, of course, till the spring. And then another ship came and rescued them, and then the darn fool raised the money and did it again. This time he did find the North Magnetic Pole. That's Sir James Ross is one of my crazy ancestors on the Ross side, but he made a lot of great discoveries. The Ross gull is named after him. It's a very anomalous little seagull that flies north for the winter. And I've talked to the world's leading ornithologist, and we still don't know where that bird nests in the wintertime. It's too small to weather, Arctic weather in the wintertime. Just not possible. It goes someplace warm. We just don't know where. Kind of leads you to wonder too. But Antarctica has all of these experiments going on down there. There's a neutrino lab down there that measures neutrinos that come through the universe. It's difficult to make one of those. You can't really have a lot of solar interference, so it's a great place to have one of those because the sun's not there for 6 months or 5+ months. There's no sun at all. So, and neutrinos are very, very fast, and they're very, very small. To give you an idea how small a neutrino is, it can go through a light year of Earths without striking anything. That's how small they are. That's how much space there is in the mass that makes up the Earth. So they have a very dense, kind of big, thick lead sensor that's very dense and very cold. and when the neutrinos go through, they can sense the neutrinos. And what they've done over a period of time is they've used the neutrinos to sort of map the neighborhood as our solar system passes through its path around the precession. It's a really interesting long-term experiment. But you think, okay, well, John Kerry didn't go down there to see that. He didn't go down there to see penguins, because Antarctica is the only place in the world that has penguins. So what did he go down there for? The answer is, we don't know. And I have been unable to find out. But I think it's very interesting. If the Nephilim are here, that would be a logical place for them to be.
Deep below the ice, possibly. Or maybe there is a entrance to the inner earth, because there's definitely something with this. And maybe Antarctica was once Atlantis. And maybe there's ancient, advanced, lost technology deep below that ice. You know, it's incredible how, you know, the imagination it keeps going and going, and the future is looking really, really great. We are living in very trying and pretty awesome times too at the same time. So I guess,
well, as I said, you know, that force that ruled the earth for 5,000 years, they want it back. And one of the claims that I make in the book, and I do have genealogy to back it up, is they've pretty much controlled who leads the world for a lot of generations. I mean, their genealogy all links back basically to one or two people until now. Now we just made a severe right-hand turn. And you can see a lot of deals that are not paying off. All the investment that's been made for hundreds of years to take this nation down is not paying off. This nation's getting stronger by the second, and they don't like it one bit. There's a lot of stress, a lot of pressure building up, and the scientific community feels it. We're trying to remain aloof from it, but we cannot, because it affects all of us.
And it seems like, of course, I don't want to get into Trump, but it seems like Trump is starting to feel it too, with all the we don't have to go.
He's been prepared for it for a long,
exactly.
Long...
And it seems like there is two factions here, really here. It could be more, but it seems like there's multiple factions that are played here. And it seems like there's a secret war that's going on behind the scenes.
One faction was asleep for a long time. They had their head down. They were concerned about their own livelihood, their own job, their own family, their own community. But a word about, you know, the word was wall. When the word wall was said, it was like everybody looked up. Like, what? It woke people up. It was like a magic word. And America came alive again with that word. And it's that wanting to divide. That's why I wrote the book, The Grand Division, because to divide the planet into factions or into light and darkness is exactly what the ancients spoke about. It's what they predicted. It's what they built all their structures, their mathematics, their architecture, their customs. Everything was built about this grand division, which makes you wonder, why in the world would someone do that 5,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago? What would they care about today? We don't care about people living 100 years from now or even 10 years from now. Why did they care about now? And it's because in my heart of hearts, I honestly believe that they are us. We're the ones that built all that stuff. We're the ones that made those cities. We're the ones that left that math, that mysterious structure behind, so that when we got here, we would remember who we are and what we're supposed to be doing.
And that is a really good point. And with the last few minutes, what do you think about time travel, Brooks? Because do you think that, of course, with the technology that we have openly. Of course, we can't time travel. But do you think that there is secret DARPA research? All roads do lead to DARPA. That they are looking into time travel, and possibly that maybe time travel, maybe they already had the technology. And one theory is that this is where we're going to leave off, and you can just go on. That, just like I said earlier, the ETs that are coming in, slipping in and out, because that's kind of what they do. They either, like I said, they're already here with us, living beneath our feet, or interdimensionally, or maybe they are actually coming from the future, or maybe they are actually us from the future. But anyways, what is your thoughts on time travel, and do we already have the technology possibly to do so?
I do know that DARPA does invest in that.
Philadelphia experiment also, with the, I know that's a lot of speculation with that too, but they said that we did time travel back in World War II.
Well, I do know that they are researching time travel. I've read, Dr. Ronald Polton and others that have written papers on it. He believes that only travel to the past is possible, not travel to the future. But one of the things that we love to do as physicists, because we can't do real experiments, is we do thought experiments. Like we use this way of eliminating all the variables and narrowing it down to, you're on a spaceship traveling through space, or you're in an elevator. We try to create these thought experiments. And one of the things that we've realized, and this goes back a few years, communications that I had with Sir Roger Penrose. He stated years ago that consciousness was the result of quantum gravity. We didn't really even know what quantum gravity was then. We were speculating on it because we always thought there were only four forces in the universe: gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak molecular forces. That was it. But then we started to realize that there was causality in the system. And the causality did not come from any of those four forces. So it's where this idea of consciousness as a physical force, as a physical influence, came from. And so when Sir Roger Penrose said that consciousness was the result of quantum gravity, I wrote him back and I published against that. I said, actually, I think that quantum gravity is the result of consciousness. Now, our older physicists like me, and even younger physicists that are coming up, we realize that consciousness may actually be the fifth force in the universe. And what's even more remarkable is we are becoming almost a consensus on this, that it is the primary force in the universe. If that's the case, then, and this is a deductive syllogism, if and then what it means is that consciousness affects time. Now, I was talking with Dr. Ed Close. He wrote a book called Transcendental Physics, which I thought was brilliant. But it brought up more questions than it did answers, and that's what I was talking with him about. Because one of the assertions that he made was that there's no path for the photon through the universe. And I said, well, no, wait a minute. If I go out here on the roof of this parking structure and I look for Arcturus, I will say, oh, look at the photons coming from Arcturus that are, striking the rods and cones of my eye, and had to travel, 8.5 light years to get here. So it had to avoid a lot of things, to get to my eye where I could see it. And he said, no, that's not it at all. There's no path for the photon from Arcturus to here. It's instantaneous. It's like a pitcher pitching a ball, but the instant the ball leaves his hands, it's in the catcher's glove. There's no path in between. Because, he said, from the perspective of the photon, it's traveling at the speed of light. And at the speed of light, time becomes zero. Or, if you want to look at the relationship in the equation, mass becomes infinity, right? If mass becomes infinity, and trust me, we don't like infinity in the standard model. We try to cancel that out all the time. We put fudge factors in to cancel out infinity and zero so we can get real answers that make sense to us. But if mass becomes infinity, doesn't that mean, I said to him, that the Big Bang never happened? Doesn't that mean that the entire universe is still the singularity, never blew up? It's actually our consciousness that slowed the universe down so that we perceive it as space.
Wow.
It made him write another book. That's what, but that's the thought experiment. So if that's the case, and our consciousness goes out in all directions all the time, think of it as a big sphere of consciousness or a little sphere, depends on if you're conscious or not. Some people don't imagine very far, and some people imagine very, very far. If that's the case, then there are other axioms that apply, like the axiom of resonance and the axiom, of course, of Fibonacci, as I mentioned it earlier, these Fibonacci nodes in nature, which these nodes, whether you start in one place or start in another, it's all relative to where you started from and what you're adding to. These nodes are along what's known as the golden mean, the golden proportion, the 1.618 to 1, phi. If energy resides on those nodes, we are very well experienced to know that it's constructively interfering. That is to say, it adds on to itself. And when it adds on to itself, and supernovas do this all the time, we don't see them very often, but when we do, we realize all the elements that we have, silicon, tin, all the elements in the periodic chart are made during these stellar events, which means that energy is being converted into mass. And it's converted every single time into exactly the same proton, every single time. There is no other form of matter anywhere, ever, in any universe. All universes are made just like this one. Because mathematically, it's the only way energy can resonate into the hologram that is a proton. And not all protons are equal, but there's a range of them from hydrogen down to iron and then up the periodic chart to the heavier elements. But they're all the same. They're all chemically work the same. They're all a holographic composite of frequencies that are consciously put together. And we know how to splatter them apart at CERN. But for all that money and all that energy, we haven't learned how to make a single thing.
Well, Brooks, we need to go ahead and round things up because, like I said, I can go down many roads with you. You talk about many things, and you put a very nice scientific perspective on things. And it's really good to have people like you. There's very few people like you, though, in this community. Very few with your resume and background. But anyways, I will get the links to your books, your website, your radio, in the description. Everybody can follow it, check it out. And man, I tell you what, I salute you for your service for humanity, and you have a good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Good to be on your program.